Good evening and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for the third episode of Humanity 2.0. This is a series of conversations with writers, storytellers, authors, poets, and artists who share their thoughts on issues related to justice. This event was conceived by Justice Collective, which is a blogging platform for insights and opinions on a broad spectrum of issues under the theme and banner of justice. And we're hosting this event in collaboration with the End Bonded Labor Handle, which is a shared digital platform for different stakeholders working on the issues of human trafficking and bonded labor. And they make these resources available to anyone who's interested in these issues or engaging with these issues in different ways. So we're so glad that you're spending the next hour with us, and we're looking forward to an engaging conversation with our guest author, as well as you, our audience. So thank you for being with us this evening. This evening, we have a very, very special guest joining us, an author whose books I have personally enjoyed reading. They have literally made me laugh out loud in the middle of reading, leaving everyone around me quite confused and also embarrassed on my behalf. And so please join me in welcoming the refreshingly honest and extremely hilarious author, Anuja Chauhan. I'm going to clap on behalf of all of you. If we were doing it live, we would all be clapping together.
Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am, for joining us. I would like to formally introduce you before we begin. Anuja Chauhan, often described as the only writer of popular Indian fiction really worth buying, is the author of 5 best-selling novels, The Zoya Factor, which has also been turned into a movie, Battle of Bitora, Those Pricey Thakur Girls, The House That BJ Built, and Baz. Her new novel, which we're hoping we can hear a little bit about from her today, is a whodunit called Club You to Death. It's set in a posh New Delhi club and is set to release in early 2021. That's super exciting. Anuja lives outside Bangalore with her husband, their 3 children, and a varying number of dogs and cats. I love that. Anuja, thank you so much once again for just taking the time to join us and chat with us today. Also, I want to take this time to just say thank you for the gift of your books. Especially in times like this when life is just hard, we could all do with more laughter and joy, and your books help us do just that. So thank you for that, and thank you for joining us today. We're really looking forward to talking to you.
Thank you for having me. That's like really sweet. It's always good. Writing is such a lonely job. Whenever you meet people, you come out of your cave and they say nice things. It's always amazing. Like you can just lap it up like good food. So
Yes,
thanks.
all true, all true. Laugh it all up. um, So here's how I thought we could proceed with our conversation for today. I have a few questions that I would like to ask you, but we're also hoping to get a whole bunch of questions from our audience. So to all our viewers who've logged in and are joining us today, please feel free to type in your questions in the chat box on Zoom. And if you're logged in from Facebook Live, then please type them into the comment section, and we will be sure to answer as many as we can in the time that we do have. If you're unable to use the chat box on Zoom, because I think it's been disabled, please use the Facebook Live to send in your questions. Thank you. So before we even begin to talk about your books, Anuja, I thought I'd ask you, what are you reading currently? And is there anything you've read recently that you would like to recommend to our viewers today?
Oh wow, that's always like I haven't been reading much lately. I have spent the entire last month obsessed with the Shera, and we've been making a Ravan. So it was 20 foot tall, and that's what I did. So
Wow.
wasn't really reading very much. So when you ask me that, no, I don't really have an answer. I read a lot through the lockdown. I did read a lot of whodunits, because it was I was writing them, and I was trying to write one for the first time, so I was trying to read them as well. So it was that sort of year, very grisly and violent. I read a lot of Dorothy Sayers actually because I hadn't read Lord Peter Wimsey before, so that was new for me.
Okay.
And yeah. So lighter kind of reading.
Hmm. That's awesome. I think this lockdown has given a lot of us the time to pursue things that we would have loved to do. Those of us who have the luxury to work from home. And so a lot of people have been reading a lot more and dabbling in the arts as well. I took on painting for the first time, which was
Okay. Yeah.
the less said about it, the better. But yes, it has given us time to pursue a lot of
Yes.
these things that we love.
You also I've also got this. I've been reading a lot of books about bringing up puppies because we're also fostering 6 puppies and trying to find them home. So it's a very chaotic house at the moment because there are 8 dogs in the house. The puppies are just terrible. So anybody out here on this Facebook Live, in case you're looking for a beautiful indie mongrel puppy with lots of heart and spirit, very healthy, then please contact. Any,
Amazing, amazing. All of you, I hope you heard that. If you're in Bangalore and looking for a puppy, you know who to talk to. Um, yeah, I love what you said about just this time and giving us time to explore things we enjoy and love. And so, speaking of book and art that inspires, what inspires your writing? You've managed to create characters and themes in your novels that are so easy to relate to as a reader as well. Whether it's a Zoya drooling over SRK or a young Baz who wants to grow up to be this fighter pilot, I think they're all so real and relatable. So if you could share it with us where you draw inspiration from for your characters and your plots.
from life, yeah. I mean, that's why I think it's so important to have like a rich life and experiences and go and put your nose out there and get involved and meet people and keep all your radar out because people are fascinating and their motivations are fascinating and their inner thinking and all their torturous little twists and turns. I mean, I really love that. So I always pick from life, for sure. And that's I mean, of course, when you've read a lot of books and you've watched a lot of films, sometimes you end up unconsciously writing characters which are familiar from literature rather than from life, and we all do that. But I think that whenever you can get like an amazing character out there who's real, that is the best person. Like, even through this whole I think because we've all been locked down at home, so your eye of Sauron has sort of turned to the home front. And so you're looking at all these people you otherwise wouldn't know, like people who live in your township and all kinds of little undercurrents that you were unaware of when you were going importantly to work and not getting involved. And suddenly you realize that it's like a seething pool of all kinds of things. There are cliques and gangs, and that's it. Like it's everywhere if you keep your radar up. And this we learned in advertising because they always said you must eavesdrop and you must talk to people and you must listen to people, and from there you get ideas. Everything will come from life. So that's what I think for sure.
That's amazing. I love what you said about people being infinitely interesting. And one of the themes that comes in your books is just the great Indian family, right? Like you describe these large families in so many of your books. And I was just thinking about it the other day. If any of your characters were set in 2020, right, and they had to be locked down at home with those big families of theirs, how they would fare and what the book would look like. And that's it's quite funny to think about. Actually, I'm imagining Zoya in her like large these Tera number house with all the uncles and aunts with nowhere else to go, no escape.
Yeah.
um
I think
yeah.
all of us all over the world are getting like a huge dose of a life at home, family, irritating people, and yeah, for sure.
I wanted to ask you, in your book, The Zoya Factor, there is this moment where Zoya is standing with her colleagues, Nilo and Vishal, there at the airport. And this is her first project. She's going to Dhaka for the World Cup. And basically, the men are discussing this billboard advertisement. And there's this model who's photographed, and they're basically rating these models based on their bodies. And Zoya is disgusted by the conversation, but it's her first work trip, so to speak, by herself. And so she feels like she has to participate and be a team player and involve herself in this conversation with her colleagues. And so, just this idea of casual sexism in the workplace, and quote unquote locker room talk. And I wanted to ask you, as a working woman, your experience of casual sexism in the workplace, and if you think things have changed.
I
And
think
yeah.
we all become much more aware, because like for whatever reason, I mean, I'm a girl. I grew up in a family of the youngest of 4 sisters in a very girly house in a convent school. but I ended up working on a brand which is aimed at young boys, right? Like the bingo audience for Pepsi, which is a brand I worked on for 14 years, is 15 to 20 young men. And so you're writing for them and you're thinking like them and you're trying to appeal to them and get them to come to you. And you don't even realize, I mean, I have been guilty of acute sexism. A lot of the scripts I've written and the work I've done, and I look at it, I'm like absolutely cold and appalled and say, how did I write that? What was I thinking? And it's awful. And so I think it's like hard to, one shouldn't point fingers, and everyone has a growth curve, right? There is casual sex. I've sat in office. I mean, we've all done it, and we have, giggled, and we have like rated people. We made lists of boys and said who's the cutest, who's an. Today, if you do something like that, you'll be fired, and correctly so, But I'm just saying that it was so much, and I know it's a terrible excuse to say everybody was doing it, but I know that I was. Definitely adding to, I was there and it was happening around me, and I didn't think there was anything wrong with it because it was so normalized and it was so like the done thing. Even in school, like in DPS Matra Road, they would put up these chick charts and these stud charts, and you always felt quite flattered to be on one. And you did not, because we had not learned words like objectification and all these things that now that my daughters throw at me so casually and say, Mama, what's wrong with you? And so I think that we're all growing. It's a growth curve as a society, and as people, we are figuring out, no, this is not right, and this is whatever. So I feel as long as people admit that and are willing to learn and understand that, look what a horrible world we made for ourselves because we've just let this slip on and on and on. And I remember so coyly in the 80s, we used to say, oh, Eve teasings and roadside Romeos and cheapies. And today they're like, stalker, like, get rid of this person. And correctly so. But, and I think it's just worse and worse and worse. And of course, there's pornography underneath, very, very violent, that younger and younger children are being exposed to. So these have now become serious issues. And so you can't, for the sake of even conversation and keeping things from getting awkward or polarized, not address these things. I mean, it's a party, everyone's having a good time. Someone says something off color, you have to address it immediately. You can't let it go and say, suppose it's a nice mood, why spoil it? You have to spoil it. And then nobody likes you. And again, nowadays, because of the lockdown, we just sit around talking the whole night, me and my daughters. And yesterday at some 3 a.m., we were getting into this whole thing of like the likable feminist, does she exist? And she doesn't. Like nobody likes a feminist. But the point is, all of us have no options but to be one. And you have to call it out all the time because it's become so terrible.
So true. Thank you for sharing that. I also love that what you pointed out about, I think we've all grown in different contexts, but as we grow, I think the journey is also in learning and unlearning a lot that we might have learned growing up. And being able to acknowledge that, I think, is a huge part of the process. Nobody's there yet. Like you said, the perfect feminist does not exist, or a likable feminist doesn't exist.
Feminist, nobody likes a feminist. Yeah, they just, oh, ये फेमिनिज्म पे चालू हो गई, तुम हर चीज में फेमिनिज्म क्यों ले आते हो? अरे हर चीज में है ना, it is there. What to do? It is like freaking. We need some serious exorcising from the casual sexism,
Yeah, absolutely.
I went to some party before the lockdown, and they had called, like, so we all hanging around, and they called some singer. So he was playing music, and in the middle he would tell little chutkulas, and then he would play a few more songs, and all these chutkulas were about this long-suffering husband with this horrible wife, and how she's. I'm like, what is this, yeah? And if you say that, then everybody starts looking at you like you're the bad person when you're not. So, but it's just like, so be it. Okay, don't like me, I'll just drop being likable, for crying out loud. It makes me more and more angry. And I think that with this menopause years coming and all, I've like become really raging and nasty about it. I think we have to. It's correct. We owe it to our girls, we owe it to our boys.
Absolutely, we do. I'm glad you brought that up. It actually reminded me of, I watched this movie Enola Holmes recently, and there's a line where she's addressing Sherlock Holmes, and he says, I'm not interested in politics. And she says, obviously you're not interested in politics, because why would you want to change a world that perfectly suits you? And so it's important that we have these conversations and just even, I think in many ways shine a light.
Like patriarchal structures don't work for boys either. They put a lot of pressure on boys to be a certain way and to not cry and to be tough and to man up and to be, aggressive. And it's not good for boys either. There's intense pressure on boys because of this structure. So it doesn't really, I mean, there she's specifically talking about the vote, I think, but
yeah,
it doesn't suit men either. Nobody's getting a good deal. Everybody's unhappy.
So we're beginning to get some questions from our viewers. I just want to remind everyone once again, I think the chat box in Zoom has been opened. So feel free to type in your questions on Zoom if you're logged in the chat box, if you're logged in on Zoom, and in the comments if you're logged in through Facebook. So one of the questions that we've got is, what role do you think, continuing with our conversation on casual sexism, what role do you think art plays, whether books or movies, in shaping what is okay and what is not right in terms of casual sexism in society?
No, it plays a huge role. Yeah, of course, art is like the soft power of art is immense, and for us, for Bollywood, Mollywood, Tollywood, all our woods play a huge role in stuff like this. And we've all seen the furor around movies like Kabir Singh and so on. And it again, like, filmmakers have to be very, very careful. And I was like honestly thoroughly disgusted with someone like Shahid Kapoor saying, "Why are you doing this role? Why are you playing this role? Why are you being this person?" Like, just don't do it, for crying out loud. But so I think that our artists need to be made responsible, and our heroines also should not. I mean, I'm glad that a lot more of them are speaking up and are not accepting the whole notion of the item number.
Right.
Some chick coming in, all that stuff. That fairy goal say and all that nonsense that they do. So it's that, and I don't it's been around for so long. Even a movie like Sholay has lyrics like Hasina Rook Jati hai aur bhi Haseen ban jati hai. And they just it's terrible. Like, we have to. It's nice to see trends with advertisers and marketers, for example, saying that they will not advertise on toxic channels. It's good that that is happening. And I think similarly, someone needs to take the high moral ground on this and say, nahi chalega. And it's nice to see, like, for example, on Star Plus, it's so cheering that the number one show in India right now is a show called Anupma, which is about this 50-year-old woman who is just coming into her own and is walking out on her marriage and is having a huge reawakening. It's a highly progressive show, and it's on Star Plus, and it is their number one show. So it's not like people don't want it.
Yeah.
So all this notion that we'll put in one disgusting sexist item number and we will have all this stuff with people slapping each other and saying that it's the same thing if men slap women and women slap men, when we all know, no, it's not the same thing at all. Because if somebody is 5 feet 2 inches tall and weighs 49 kgs and she slaps you, you're not going to get the same kind of thing that I would get if you are 6 feet tall and freaking 80 kgs of pure muscle and you slap me. I mean, what are we talking about? These are not equalities. You can't compare this stuff. And these things are so obvious that you think people know them, but we've reached a point that most obvious things have to be stated and constantly, and filmmakers totally need to be culpable for that, and they need to be aware and put all that in, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right. We have another question from Dina Rodriguez. She says, so true. Conversations around this is not right when it comes to casual sexism are so important. Do you think the lockdown has brought to the forefront gender stereotyping at home?
100%. I think all of us in all our homes and all my girlfriends, I've struggled with this personally, especially the first 2-3 months when there was absolutely no domestic help. We had all of us spoiled, privileged, entitled people. We all have drivers and cooks and cleaners and everything, and they've all gone. You saw what came, yeah? You saw who was doing the Zoom call while cutting, doing everything. It was the women, right? And people were so resentful about it, and it just clearly showed how sexist the situation is. And again, I find that what I have realized from conversations and what I personally observed is that women are the worst offenders. It is women who do this to other women. So if there's a husband and a wife, and the husband is happy to help and is coming and saying, oh, I'll do the dishes, and I'll chop the vegetables for you, and there will be some older lady in the house lurking in the background saying, why are you making him do this stuff? And it's surreal. You're like, you are an educated woman, why are you acting like this? But they're like, no, she's making my son chop veggies. It's terrible. At some point in the lockdown, we really turned into like one of those regressive TV shows, and it totally came to the forefront. So hopefully it had a good ending, because maybe men learned what women do all the time. When men are working from home, and they're realizing how much work there is in the house, and that Bengan doesn't magically turn into bharta all by itself, and rooms don't magically get cleaned, and shirts just don't appear crisply ironed on their bed in the morning to be worn. So I think that in a sense it's good that the spotlight has turned to the home, and there is more and more respect for the work that goes on at home, no matter who does it.
That's true. Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. I'll take one more question from our audience before we move on to our next topic. This is a question from Sarah Elizabeth. She asks, for women facing sexism in politics, how do you think they can and should handle it?
It's quite sad, but whether it's politics or it's anything else, you have to be twice as good. You have no option. You have to be twice as good. And of course, I'm going to be a little rude out here and said, we are twice as good, so we can be twice as good. That's one. The other thing is that you have to stop giving a damn about being liked. I think that women tend to be liked, to carry everybody along, to speak in a softer voice, to be the voice, like even in the workplace, women are in, they go into fields like HR and, stuff like that, which is about like, yeah, you don't be the HR lady. If you're rude and obnoxious and out there, just do it. If a man does it, nobody's ever going to say anything to him, right? It's that same thing. If he's aggressive, he's a tiger. If she's aggressive, she's a bitch. So it's like, just don't be that person. And in politics, especially, I do find, though, and this I've seen from personal observation as well, that Indian men are very comfortable after a point with women in power, in powerful positions. Maybe it's because they have a huge tradition of, the Devi. So whether if you can get past all that stuff and somehow be established on like a Durga mode, or in like a in that kind of a goddess mode, then they're very comfortable to kowtow and do everything you say. You just have to be badass enough to reach that point and not give a damn about people getting upset or you not being womanly enough, or like how our prime minister was sort of shaming Renuka Chaudhary for laughing like a Ravan or something, he said in parliament. So it's like, yeah, so I'm laughing like a Ravan, deal with it. Yeah, who said that I can't? So and she was visibly upset about it, and I didn't understand why she should be upset. I mean, honestly, I think she should have been flattered, but you feel like that because somewhere you do feel that when men say that you've lost your femininity and you've become too manly and you're being assertive and you're being disliked, these are all things that we should just really stop giving a damn about. And once you're free of that pressure to be liked, you will prevail in amazing ways. We should stop giving a shit about being liked and start giving a serious damn about being respected. Respect. Let's go for respect. I want respect. And that is, and in politics, then you'll see, suddenly you'll become Didi, you'll become Amma, you'll become Benji, you'll become all these amazing, like goddess mode. Once you're in goddess mode, no Indian man will dick with you. You just have to reach till that point, especially in politics. You can't back down, and it's hard. If you look at Mamata Banerjee, as she goes out there in those Bata chappals, and who will mess with that woman? It's like, never mind everything else, but as a persona and as someone who's achieved so much, it comes from there. So I think being liked is terrible, and being guilt. The other thing that Indian women here all the time, we always feel so guilty. The other thing is stop feeling guilty, stop being apologetic. Do not apologize.
Yeah.
And this is something, in a corporate meeting, someone said to me, she said, when you walk into a room and you're late for a meeting, don't say, don't say, I'm sorry, I'm late. Say, thank you for waiting. It's a small thing, but I think it's a big thing.
Language,
when you slide into the meeting room, don't look embarrassed and say, I'm sorry, I'm late. Just look around and say, thank you for waiting for me.
Yeah, that's right.
It's
Yeah,
like,
language
okay,
is powerful. That's true.
yeah,
Language is
yeah.
powerful.
Only like a whole thing needs to change, especially in politics, because it's so symbolic.
Absolutely. I loved what you shared. And speaking of politics, in your book, Battle of Bittora, through your characters, Zen and Sarojini, they are young candidates standing for Lok Sabha elections. Um, so, could you talk to us about the interest or the lack thereof that young people have in the electoral process, in politics, in governance? You'd written this book in 2010, and now in 2020. Do you think things have changed? Do you think young people are more interested or involved, more
Yeah.
opinionated, even
I
when it
think
comes
so.
to
I really think so because I think that Battle for Bittora I started writing in 2008, and I
right?
had some pressure from my publisher saying, "Why do you want to write about politics? People don't give a damn." And I just written a book about cricket and advertising, which is all very like very shiny and sparkly and catchy and feel good and all that. And it was like, and I was like, no, but I think this is an immense thing and we should write it. And again, I think it's good to go with your gut, because Battle for Bittora came out in 2010, and then a little after that, this whole Anna Hazare movement started, and all these people came in, and you had that whole wave and the formation of the Aam Aadmi Party, and suddenly there was more interest amongst young people in the whole thing. And I think more and more over this decade, we are definitely seeing kids, maybe just my kids, I don't know, because we all live in bubbles, but I do think that they are getting more interested. But
Mm,
of course, not enough. A lot of people still think that if I can get out of this country, I'll just get out. There is that, which is very heartbreaking.
yeah.
But they're definitely more interested than they were before, I
Mm,
think. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. I think also, this article you'd written in the week about Do Poor Lives Matter? And you'd mentioned a conversation with your daughter about the Black Lives Matter movement abroad and the migrant workers issue in India, and how people were relating to both of these. Um,
Yeah, that's
terrible-
kids.
yeah,
Yeah, there is that. And I think all of them, like this entire band of children that I interact with, because they're really, my kids and their friends, they were really upset about that. They say, just, can you please look what's happening around you at the
mm,
bus stand, which is probably 10 kilometers from your house, like people are waiting, they're starving, they can't get home, they're walking. That whole thing on that app, which says like on Google Maps, when it says so much by, in the car it'll take so much time, and on the bike it'll take so much time, and if you walk it'll take 7 days. And it became so poignant because suddenly that's what was happening. People were walking for 7 days, and earlier we just laugh and say, what is this ridiculous option? And
yeah,
it was true and happening around us, and here we are going on. I'm not saying that black lives don't matter, but I'm saying that we've got our own shit, and why are we not interested in fixing that? Because it's not considered cool now. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah,
all these privileged kids straight off from class 10, oh my God, it's all like about the SAT and the entries and the essays and the universities. And they're like already, even in my colony here in Bangalore where I live, I'm sorry, I have lovely neighbors. They are not Indians. Most of the people in this township. Everybody has American citizenship or some other random citizenship of Dubai or Australia or something. They're just living here because it's convenient and nice, but they don't necessarily need to get involved in the politics. And
mm,
so the references are like that. They don't watch. They don't. They all the TV shows that they're watching. So they'll be like watching Schitt's Creek, and they'll be watching Elite, and nobody's watching like Anupama on Star Plus, for
yeah,
example, which I'm. So yeah, so it's like, आपका. That's why they don't care.
yeah, yeah. Um, but along that same line of just the whole migrant worker crisis and just the many human rights issues we're seeing around us,
Yeah.
I want to ask, what role do you think art and literature can play in capturing and telling these stories and lived experiences, especially what we've witnessed in the last couple of months? And any tips for young writers who might be watching today, who would like to write about these things that they're seeing around them, issues of humanity and development and human rights? What would you like to tell them?
No, I think that these are absolutely all the hot button issues that should be written about and talked about. These are the most vital issues. And I think I would urge all young people and creative people. Oh, now Kangna Ranaut has called us all creative terrorists. I love the word. I'm all for being a creative terrorist. So I think all the creative terrorists out there should I think what happens is that in the entertainment industries, they'll always say, but Article 15 ban gayi na, aap chhod do. वो हो गया. So Article 15 ban gayi, so let's freaking make no entry. Huh? Bloody no entry you have made 50,000 times and you don't mind. After no entry, you made welcome to, you made masti, you made grand masti, you made ma masti. There you have no problem. So why one Article 15 is supposed to stand for at least 3 years before someone else comes along and makes something else, similar in that context. So they've got to stop getting exhausted and saying that with the ideas or with the anger and with the outrage, and you have to continue to stay outraged, but in a very cool, calm way, and keep telling these stories. And I'm saying, tell them entertainingly, tell them in a way that people who buy the ticket or wherever, now we're all watching online, are entertained as well, and that the correct kind of heroism is celebrated.
Yeah.
People are not the thing is, like, whether it's something like Kabir Singh, that amazing film which made shitloads of money, we are deliberately glorifying and making this kind of machismo, we are romanticizing it, and we are putting fairy lights and firecrackers around it and saying this is it. Now, we need to start glorifying the correct kind of thing. I can understand, for example, in something like love, and the whole thing of consent, right? And they say that it's so unromantic to ask a girl, can I kiss you, and then kiss her, because that's not romantic. It's not romantic because you've not made it romantic. Consent can be incredibly sexy. There can be 50 ways of asking a boy if you can kiss him, or the other way around, or, whatever genders. But people don't want to do that. You can put crackers and fire, and lights around that kind of a conversation and make it incredibly romantic. We don't do that. We tend to romanticize that whole, the grabbing of the hand and the masterful pulling and all that. Masterful pulling, say that this is not the era for masterful pulling. Now you better change your thing. Your adjectives need to change, and it can be done, and it is sexy. And I think we need to create stories around that. Yeah. I think like one popular film which got a lot of bad press, but I personally liked, was Badrinath Ki Dulhania, where you saw that the character of the Badrinath guy, who's played by Varun Dhawan, was a really small town, very sexist, typical guy, but he had a growth curve. He went a certain way, and at the ending, you saw how proud he was of the girl and how humbled he was by her, and how amazing he thought that, the way she made her life, she got a job, she had an amazing career and everything. And it made him also reach higher, dream more, widen his world. And she did that, So I think verses like in Kabir Singh, where they just end up slapping each other and then crying and having a child together, and nobody ever tells him that you can't do this, and nobody ever shamed him for doing what he did. So I think that kind of cinema is good. That kind of writing is good. Make it likable, make it entertaining. Put in a rocking song like Badri Ki Dulhania, and also tell your story well. Don't preach to people and don't talk down to them. Entertain them and slip in a little education.
Yeah, absolutely. They're not mutually exclusive. I love how you brought that out, that entertainment and education don't have to be mutually exclusive. They can be done well together.
Yeah, you can. Of course you can. And some of the early shows, a lot of shows on Doordarshan used to do that really well. Doordarshan in that sense, in its golden days, did a very decent job on all these things.
Yeah. We have a question from Manasi, who says, I completely agree to the point that filmmakers should be more careful, I'm assuming in the content and the kind of movies they make, but I'm not able to point them fully, as the government is the board that certifies the films. So what do you think they should do about this?
The government, the world we are living in today, the government is really not interested in this stuff. Yeah. So I mean, these are really dark days. We are in seriously Ghor Kali Yuga, I would say. The kind of stuff that they get outraged about, and the kind of stuff that they don't, it's ridiculous. It's all wrong. So of course, what you're saying is absolutely correct. And we should have a sensible board of censor certification. But we have Prasoon Joshi there, and we've all seen him doing that interview with the Prime Minister. We sort of understand where his outrage lies and what he chooses to get outraged about. And of course, it's a very established and amazing body, but they are not, they're not catching the stuff. You know, any kind of censor board, I'm not even sure who's in charge of it where, but if you're allowing these songs out, the kind of songs that we've seen and the kind of films we've seen, and they were like, sometimes people do listen. Like there was this movie called Tanaji, I remember, that came out, and everyone was very outraged about something that the Kajol character said. She said that something about jab Tanaji ki talwar chalti hai to, she said something about how Brahmins are safe and the Janeus are safe, something ridiculous like that. And there was so much outrage that they changed it. They changed the dialogue, and they made it much nicer and much more sensitive to the fact. I'm so glad that finally people are talking about caste, you know, and that people are acknowledging that a lot of the stuff that we've casually, our movies glorify Rajputana and Kshatriyas and, you know, Brahmins, and like we do a lot of that. So it's good that people are realizing that this is not. And there's a lot of like, they justify it by saying that, oh, but this is period correct. In that time, this used to happen. But the point is, you're making your movie in 2020, right? So you have to be. I mean, Enola Jones, for example, that was also said, the film you mentioned. But they're keeping, you know, they're keeping the fact that this is being made for a 2020 audience in mind.
Absolutely. Yeah. So Weber asks in the chat box, since you have a marketing background, and this might be a crude question, how do you make equality and justice saleable?
I think there are opportunities everywhere. Every time you make an ad, you have a chance to do that. And you can always choose to take it or you cannot take it. Every time you're making an ad, I've been in countless boardrooms, casting countless girls in countless ads for colas, chips, chocolates, which I sold a lot of unhealthy food my whole life. And the girls come up, you know, the girls we're casting in the ad. Everyone wants a fair girl.
Yeah.
It's right. She needs to be slim, she needs to be fair, she needs to have doe eyes, she needs to have like shiny long black hair. We are just feeding the stuff, and we can make it nicer. I mean, but we don't. I mean, for example, just now, it's anyway, that Tanishq thing is a whole different angle. I won't go to the Tanishq thing. But I'm saying, for example, there was this really famous ad for I think it was Indigo, you know, Indigo Airlines. And when they came in, they had a really, really nice ad, and it was like a musical. And they talked about Indigo Airlines, and they had all these lovely stewardesses in the little dresses, and it was like a musical. And they had all these pilots coming in with their suits and walking around the pilots through the plane, and the air hostesses served the coffee. And the whole thing was like that. And it was a lovely ad, but the pilots were all men, and the stewardesses were all women.
Yeah.
Why is that? You had a chance. You didn't take it. You could have taken it. You know, every single time in advertising, there's a chance. But you start your ad with the woman reading the newspaper, no, at the breakfast table. How many ads have you seen? Every time one wretched father will be holding the newspaper and the mom will be putting the chai. You have a chance right there. Now let the mom read the paper. Let the father bring the tea. They don't do it.
No. Yeah.
And there's again and again and again, there's an opportunity, and they like just, but of course, poor advertising, because they like obsessed with, they just want people to like them. They also like, you know, women in the workplace, like, please like me. Like, don't go for like, Baba, go for respect, you know, do that. Oh, yeah.
I think just continuing with this conversation, Shantanu asks, to what extent do books need to be just entertaining as against also giving a social message? And we've spoken a little bit about this already, but if you'd like to just maybe say a little more.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that there's, again, like in advertising, you always have the opportunity. You can always slip in a little education or slip in your own point of view or something that you feel strongly about. Just slide it in, yeah, you know, put it in there. And why not? So I really don't think it's a trade-off. I think they actually build on each other. It just, your humor becomes a little more intelligent. Your entertainment becomes a little more like smart. And I'm not saying do it all the time, you know, and hit people over the head with it.
Yeah.
You know, it's like just flash some intellectual cleavage now and then, just so that people know you got it. Just show it. Kabhi kabhi dupatte, kabhi chodo, kabhi dikhao. Just keep it there, yeah. It'll only make your work better. It'll make it more entertaining, and people will laugh longer and they'll come back for that joke. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. Santosh asks on Facebook, how much do you think the narrative plays in these conversations? For example, most of the stuff done to women is reported as the woman was so and so. How much impact would it have to change the narrative by saying a man did this, whatever, to a woman? In other words, women are being made targets instead of making men own up to what they have done.
yeah, I mean, this is again, you're right. It's the same thing that comes up again and again. Like, why are we telling girls don't go out after 8 p.m.? Just tell boys don't go out after 8 p.m. Yeah, sit in the house quietly. That nobody says. They're all roaming around in crazy packs. Unemployment all time high. Nobody has a job. They're jobless and irritated.
Yeah.
And as that, the justice Karju keeps saying these things, and everyone was very angry with him with saying it. But he did have kind of a little point when he said they're unemployed, and because they're unemployed, no one's marrying them, and so they're like losing it.
Yeah.
I mean, we're just seeing like collapse on every front. And yeah, I mean, men should totally be blamed for whatever they're doing wrong. I mean, how much of the same stupid conversation we've always been having? Was she wearing shorts? Why was she with a boy? Why did she go to see a movie? You know, I mean, it's exhausting and dreary, and like we really need to get beyond this stuff.
Yeah, I agree. So, moving on to a little different trajectory of this conversation, Melita asks, what are some books, ma'am, that inspired you as a child?
Inspired. I wasn't really reading for inspiration. I was reading for entertainment. Totally, you know,
Yeah.
it was like
A book
fun.
you enjoyed as a child.
Books. Yeah, I think the one of the first series I read were the Narnia books, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and that was in my school library. And then we went running back and we borrowed the entire series. So that was a huge fun for us. We named our dog Aslan. We used to call him Ashu. You know, he was named books, and that was like a huge deal. And I read what everybody reads. Because we were four sisters in the family growing up, my mom used to get a lot of like Mrs. Bennett and Mrs. March, you know, so there was a lot of Little Women. And Pride and Prejudice, I don't know, I've never really, everyone loves that book. I've never really been a fan because I always feel that Elizabeth and Jane are just so like, oh, hum itni sundar hain, and we are so classy, and our younger sisters are also bad. Like, why don't you teach your younger sisters something? Why don't you talk to them more? So I can never get over that divide in that family between those three sisters. These two, like, oh, we are so cool. And I don't get it. Like, you're the same family. Why are you not teaching your sisters any better? That Mr. Darcy, that man has no sense of humor. He's honestly, I find him really boring. In that entire, that man has one half-assed weak joke about how if you want us to admire your figures, we can admire them from where we are sitting, which just sounds like little lewd. And he's nothing funny in the whole book. And everybody is like, I mean, I know again, it's period correct and, you know, it's the right thing to do. Everybody is after that poor Lydia to marry that horrible Wickham. Why should she marry him? And they're like, oh, wow, he got the marriage done. So now Lydia's screwed for life, basically. You know, so that book really upsets me. And I've honestly not been able to understand why everybody likes it so much. But I also politely go along with it and say, okay. Like, you're like, what? Versus Little Women, which I find a far superior book. You know, I mean, I just like really, and I like how Jo is, and I like the fact that Jo and Laurie are friends, but she does not like him romantically, and those girls felt much more real. And I love the relationship, if you see, between Jo and Amy versus between Elizabeth and Lydia. That's like they don't talk, you know. And if you see Jo and Amy, it could be similar, but you see Jo and Amy, they love each other. You know, it's a family. It's a different thing. It's much more real. It's a better book. I always feel it's a better book, but people just dismiss it as some, like, you know, some kiddish book or whatever. But and so for me, inspiration, I think I got a lot from Little Women. I mean, of course, you know, all these books are very full of little homilies and how girls should be and how men should be and stuff like that. But I remember wanting to be like them. I wanting to put up plays and to hang with my sisters and do stuff and to have a job and to not get married and write books. I found all that in Little Women. So
Yeah.
it was, I think, I quite like that book.
Yeah. I loved your perspective on these books, your take on these books as someone who's had sisters. I think it's
Yeah.
a very interesting, your take on these books are very interesting from your own experience as someone who's grown up with sisters. And so thank you for sharing that. Continuing on that line with books and childhood, so Melita asks again, as a parent, have you found books helpful to introduce gender equality and justice or empathy to your kids?
Yeah.
Any for parents who might be watching today?
And my husband did a really clever thing to my son when I think he, poor child, must have been 11 years old or something. He gave him a love story and said, "You read this book, yeah, Devi." And very great love story. And then he came out and his face, he was so shaken. He's like, "It's so sad. She dies." I'm just so. And then he had this weird, vulnerable look on his face for a whole week. And I was like, "What have you done to the child?" But it was a really good book to give him to read at that point. Because I think he was just reading Alex Rider at that point. So he was nice and gave him love story. And I think
Yeah.
you should just throw them, toss them anything. You don't know what they'll, you know. Don't do this like only for kids kind of thing. When we were growing up, my dad was in the army, and we would sometimes being locked up with a huge. He had a huge cupboard full of literature of all kinds of ages, and we just read everything indiscriminately. So we were reading P.G. Woodhouse and of Human Bondage on the same day, and
Yeah.
saying wow, and just reading it without any editorial comment and saying, just toss it to them and say, here's the complete plays of Noel Card, just go for it. Or, here's something way more depressing. And we were just like reading absolutely anything. And
Yeah.
I think you should not, I think you should expose your kids to all kinds of stuff for sure. And definitely something that is not like Love Story at 11 is a little non-traditional. I really felt. And yeah, don't like let them reach a little. Like how they say that if a child rides a cycle that's a little larger for him, then he'll grow taller. So I think that in the same way, like if you give them books that they aren't ready for yet, that might work amazingly, making the
Yeah.
mind grow.
Yeah. That's a cool thought. I love that. Princey asks, well, she says, Anuja ma'am, hail. Intellectual cleavage is my new mantra now. Um, she asks, ma'am, do you see a role for CSR to play in the field of publishing to promote work that cuts across social categories of gender and caste and class?
Yeah. No, I know a lot of people have been trying to do that. People have actively been trying to do that kind of thing where you're getting behind these stories and educating people and stuff. But we're also seeing a very dangerous trend where people are now banning books and burning books and say not publishing this, not publishing that. So publishers, maybe if they have CSR with them, then that might give them a little more dum to actually go out there because they know they have funding and get that stuff done. But it's also a little worrying for me because I've always been a little suspicious of corporates generally and even their social responsibility because it's not right in a well-functioning democracy. Corporates should know their place, like you make a profit, give it to your shareholders, leave it at that. I'm also a little scared by the thought of these people putting their things into policy in their own agenda, because once you're putting in the money, then you are technically in a position to arm twist. Of course you are. So you've got your own ship to cover. So, for example, like this whole thing of some of the big names like Bajaj and Pale saying that we will not advertise, or even I think it was Dollar saying that we won't advertise in toxic channels. I think well and good, and maybe the intentions are good, but it is a little worrying when big money and multinationals can tell you what news you should be covering. It's not nice.
Yeah.
It's not nice. It's not right. But the thing is that institutions have collapsed in such a disastrous fashion that where you would trust the press and you would look to journalism to actually shine a torch on what's wrong with the country and bravely and without bias report that, wo to ho nahi raha. And so we're seeing this messy situation where everybody is trying to do everybody else's job, and it's wrong. It's not healthy for democracy.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to take a question from Lillian now. We have time only for a few more questions, so we'll answer as many as we can. Lillian asks, why are there such less witty, humorous fiction books to read? Is it because humor is tough to write?
Maybe it is. Yeah, it's hard to be funny. And again, I saw these interviews. I think it was like Alia Bhatt, or one of these sweet young actresses, and she was saying that she said, everybody appreciated me so much. I'm not even sure if it was Alia Bhatt or who it was, or it was Varun Dhawan or whoever. But they said that I worked so hard on comedy. It's so hard to be funny. And nobody appreciates. Like, I honestly think that Ranbir Kapoor's best performance to date has been in Najab Prem Ki Gajab Kahani. Okay? And I remember at some shoot telling him this. I said, "What are you saying? That's such a stupid movie." Like, what? But honestly, he's so good. It's his best performance. 50 times better than that stupid Barfi and those other weird movies he makes. So, humor is tough. It's hard to do. It's hard to write. Some of the better scripts, I know I've been like dissing, like No Entry and Welcome, but there are some bits in No Entry which are highly intelligent, really funny. And it is hard to make people laugh. Of course, they're also sexist and horrible and all kinds of things. But it's not easy scripting humor. And like you look at British humor, I mean, it's always, it is at an amazing level. It is really funny, really smart, very intelligent. And we still have that little banana peel falling on, and even Kapil Sharma, he was really funny at one point, and now he's not. But I think some of the stand-up comics do try to do that, and it is hard to do that.
Yeah.
It's definitely hard to be funny.
Yeah.
And maybe that's why they have not many books to answer your question.
Absolutely, yeah. So thank you then once again for bringing in funny books for us to read.
Yeah, it's like sometimes I think all this noir, blood, and dark lighting, it's a bit of a cheap trick. I feel, it's like yeah, okay, wow, you got an amazing DOP that doesn't necessarily make sense.
Fostering, yeah. Quickly want to ask a question from Apeksha Solanki, who's logged in from Facebook. She says, she asks, what are the various ways you use to market your books?
I don't really get involved with the marketing of my books because I mean I've done so much advertising and marketing in my day job that I was like, at least in books, let me not get involved. I do sweat on the covers a lot. I poke my nose in shamelessly and I flex my advertising muscle and say I will get involved because I'm good at this and I've done this and I have the creds. So I do get a little pushy about that. But on the other things, I don't know. I'm not really savvy about marketing so much as far as books go. I don't know much about. Sorry.
That's perfectly fine. On that note, why don't you tell us a little bit about your upcoming book, Club You to Death?
Wow, it just seems like I wrote it so long ago. I mean, I started in January and I was done. The submission date was the 1st of June. It was supposed to have a Diwali release, but now they just feel that this is not, they'd rather bring it out when everything is up and running. Again, it's a marketing decision, which I don't know much about. But it was really fun to write. Again, it's a book. I think the themes, because it's set in like, like if you guys are from Delhi, like in a Delhi Gymkhana club or a Tollygunge club or a Bangalore club or, one of those like really Tony posh places everyone kills to get a membership of. And which is why it's called Club You to Death. And so the book talks, think a lot about privilege and about all our little social hierarchies and that kind of thing. So it touches on all that kind of stuff. And of course, there is a lovely murders in the book, which I had so much fun writing. I have a Zumba trainer. He's the person who gets murdered. He's like this really hot Zumba trainer that all the ladies are salivating over, and then he is found dead. Very gruesome. It's good fun. I really like my hero and my heroine, and I do know that people like the romance I write. So I mean, we do have a lot of romance as well. Yeah.
Awesome. That sounds super exciting. Something for all of us tuned in today to look forward to. Um, on that note, our last question for this evening, Anuja, because we know it's almost 8 o'clock and we want to respect your time as well. As we wind up, what is your hope for us as humanity, as a world, post this pandemic? Um, any words of encouragement, words of wisdom, words of caution that you just like to
No, I
share?
think everybody's hoping that been given perspective, that we have given perspective on what is important and what your energy should be spent on. So I think we've got that. And I think it become too, like too much conspicuous consumption and just living at like just too much of everything. So I'm glad that we've gone back to a space where we are being a little more spared and everything is a little more pared down, whether it is, the price of lehengas or the cost of weddings or, the business travel budgets and the, the pressure we put on ourselves in the workplace and stuff. And so I'm glad that a lot of that, I think, has got corrected, and that there will be better quality control now in some way, and that people will hopefully choose a more balanced life, that there'll be more focus on the home and your core people, your little gang that helps you get through things, that we've learned and recognized the real value of the real people in our lives and what is. So I think my hope is that humanity has gained perspective, has regained perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so true. Um, and on that note, I just want to say thank you, Anuja, for your time and for
Thank
being
you.
so honest and truthful and just sensitive to what we as humanity are going through in this season. Really appreciate your thoughts and the way you articulated them this evening. To our audience, we know you had a lovely time. So since the chat box is open, feel free to type in your appreciation to Anuja for sharing her time with us this evening. I would also like to thank each of you for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed our conversation. We're hoping to continue this series and would love for you to stay connected with us. So you can hop on over and subscribe to the End Bonded Labor page on Facebook. You can follow End Bonded Labor on Twitter. Additionally, the Justice Collective page has a blog that publishes articles on humanity and human rights and different issues of interest. So if you're watching today, the links will come up in your chat box. Please feel free to click on those links and send in your articles. We would love to publish your thoughts and your writings on these different issues. And finally, yeah, please do stay connected with us. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. Have a wonderful evening, stay safe, and we will see you very, very soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Bye, everybody. Thanks for listening.